name is Yusuph Kileo from Tanzania, cybersecurity and digital forensics investigator. You mentioned clearly there that probably some country they might use those incitement and hate speech to probably do something with their opponent or this and that. So how do you draw the line between those people that they may go online inciting other people to do things that they're not supposed to do within the countries themselves? For example, in Tanzania or in Kenya, we have politicians, we have people that can incite others to do things that they're not supposed to do in that particular country. And when you address that issue as a hate speech or incitement, how can you tell that, for example, that country or those individuals might use that the story of hate speech and incitement to probably bring down their opponent and so on? Something like this. So I'd like to hear your opinion on that matter. And the second thing is that I've seen, I don't know, I want to hear your opinion as well. I've seen, for example, in our country, in Africa, most of the time, in most cases in Africa, when we have these challenges of incitement, hate speech, disinformation, misinformation, we have our way of encountering those challenges. But very unfortunately, when we do this, then there will be a statement from Europe or US that you do not allow people to have free speech, or you do not allow people to express themselves online the way they should be expressing. But the same thing when it happens on other countries, you see the measures have been taken very seriously. For example, I'll give an example. In the United Kingdom, I think it was last year, around August, there were a lot of hate speech online, and people were doing a lot of crazy stuff. And then around 12 people were arrested, and it was all over the news. But when the same thing probably happened in our African country, and when we are trying to take measures, because I'm sitting on the position where we normally take measure to those kind of things, so that we can make sure that our country remains safe. Then you can hear a lot of statement that you're not supposed to do this. You need to let people speak. So what's your opinion on these two things? Thank you.
Yep. I just want to know how we're doing on time, just so I can keep a little bit of track, or it's good. Last one. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. And I'm very happy that you are coming up with all those extremely important questions and extremely relevant questions as well. So thank you for that. And as I said, I'm here, so we can also have, we can continue the conversation. Your second, so now I took note. So I'll start with your second, just to say that the UN position and the Secretary General's position on hate speech and freedom of opinion and expression is that any measure to address and counter hate speech needs to be done in accordance with the right to freedom of opinion and expression. And that means that it's a challenge, that it's very difficult to do. It's really, I mean, it's a beautiful sentence to keep repeating, but it's very, very difficult to do that, right? And that's why we need to always, always remember the importance of, trying as much as possible to keep that balance. That's why we have international instruments. That's why we have protected rights, right? To ensure that whatever is done to restrict one right is done in order to ensure another right, to guarantee another right. It's a very difficult discussion. It's a very, I don't want to say a thin line, because not necessarily the line will be thin. Sometimes the line will be very explicit, but there are occasions where, the line is difficult. And I don't have it here now today, but usually when we do an actual capacity building for the UN, but also, for civil society, for government officials, we usually have some case scenarios and some concrete examples and some fictitious examples, and sort of like a case study, but more importantly, a scenario where we'll give you a sentence and we'll say, okay, is this hate speech or not? Is this protected or not? Right? So, and you see that sometimes, for me, I see a sentence and I think, okay, this is very obvious, a case of hate speech that is prohibited hate speech, not protected. Because remember, sometimes even though speech will be offensive, will be terrible, will be very, very ugly, sometimes it is protected, right? It will be protected speech. It will be at the bottom level, but it doesn't mean that we don't do anything about it, right? So that's why we have the UN strategy. That's why we have the 13 commitments. It's really to counter hate speech, to add more narratives, to add counter narratives, to debunk disinformation, for example, right? To debunk those narratives that talk and that target specific groups of people. So it's really, I know it's a very heated discussion as well, and thank you for bringing that up. So I think that would be my comment on your second question. On the first one, it's really, really important that, and I was going to mention this in 2 slides ahead, but I'll just mention it now. When we talk about hate speech, we are talking about, action and activities and holistic approaches to be taken by civil society, by the government, by the UN, blah, 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 blah. But then we are also talking about individuals, right? So there's also my own responsibility, not even as a UN staff, but my own responsibility to make sure that I'm not disseminating hate speech, right? That I'm not disseminating misinformation and disinformation and of course, hate speech. And that responsibility is not only my responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility as individuals. And then when we go to people with leadership, right, people who are in leadership positions, there's also that responsibility to make sure that not only we are countering hate speech, but we are not disseminating hate speech. And that's a very important reminder. I know it's a challenge. I understand it's a challenge, but I think we cannot forget the individual responsibility.
My name is Chalo Mwengi. I work for the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, the institution that addresses matters hate speech in this country. Now, when you are monitoring hate speech, what definition or ingredients do you consider that might constitute hate speech? Because locally here, we have what would constitute hate speech locally, which maybe it's not accepted in other areas. For example, in the US, where they don't have freedom of expression per se, for them is free speech. So when you are monitoring for hate speech, how do you identify? And then secondly, we have about 6 or 7 international instruments that also have their own idea of what they would describe hate speech to be. So I don't know from where you sit as a UN, if you have thought of harmonizing some of these legislations that speak to hate speech. Then I'm quite interested. I've heard you mention that you have about 26 countries that are developing action plans. I don't know whether you have considered as Kenya, because 4 or 5 years ago, we were the first country to develop an action plan against hate speech. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. I think I'll start from the last one. Yes, absolutely. So when I mentioned 27 entities, I was referring specifically about UN entities, UN-field entities. So these are context-specific action plans for the United Nations to address and counter hate speech. And then, of course, we are very familiar with the pioneer work of Kenya, of course, in adopting the first ever national strategy on hate speech. Absolutely. On international instruments, the UN position is very clear in the sense that hate speech, I'm not talking about incitement to genocide or incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. I'm talking about specifically hate speech, right? So there's no legally binding definition of hate speech, of what constitutes hate speech. So that's why we have a UN definition, which is not legally binding, to guide the work of the UN. But then, of course, it can be mirrored by national legislation, by other legislations as well, to ensure that there is also this reflection of the UN strategy, the concept at the UN strategy. And then the first question, could you? Oh, I just answered the first question. I think there was another point of the question that I'm not remembering now. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I hope I covered all the questions, but I'll be happy to answer anything else. And if I didn't, please let me know, and we have the conversation on the side.
So,
yeah. Thank you.
in terms of addressing some of these issues, we have, of course, as it has been said, we've done a lot of trainings. Of course, I think the effect of those trainings remain in those rooms, because some of the participants we train are the ones who go and engage in hate speech. Of course, fighting hate speech is a huge challenge. Initially, when the law was created in 2008, we were looking at offline hate speech. Now it has migrated online, and that is where we are having most of it. Again, monitoring hate speech online is quite a challenge. First of all, the platforms are not willing to share information. Again, it has become more of a business model. They sell data, whatever you click on, and you know what happens is the stories that are sell are the bad stories. Man bites dog, right? Nobody wants these stories about development and the likes. So there's a huge challenge in accessing data from the platforms. Again, content moderation. Most of these platforms, the content moderation is done in English. Hate speech here, when we want to spill hate, we retreat into our ethnic cocoons. And then also the use of coded language is another challenge. I think regionally now we have a group that is trying to develop a lexicon that speaks to local languages. We are also pushing very hard for content moderators that speak local languages. Then we have also a weak law, 2008, 2025, it's still the same law. There's need to readjust and to take care of emerging issues. Then what are we doing? We are also trying to leave hate speech at the back. We are running programs in schools. We have a program we call Amani Clubs, where we are trying to leave hate speech in schools again, because it brings out stigmatization. We also have this challenge. We are giving our young children our phones, where you don't have this tool to protect data. Underage children are using your phones to access content and whatever, which is also another challenge. Parents, we are working closely with the communities to help with that. Then issues of dealing with root causes. Of course, as a commission, we carry out researches to identify social cohesion status, how resources are being distributed, so that we reduce the root causes so that we can manage hate speech. But of course, again, in the global south, we have a challenge with the way we operate, and also the way our big brothers from the global north treat us. When we arrest one or two culprits, people who are perpetrating hate speech, it becomes a very huge human rights issue. But we look at the UK following the unrest with the illegal migrants. We had about 561 people arrested and prosecuted. Following the US elections and the storming of Capitol Hill, we had a huge number of people who had engaged, and it was not a human rights issue. So those are some of the clawbacks we have, because again, we get negative whatever from our masses. Why are you doing to us this? And in the Western world, they have these freedoms. And then again, we don't have a universal definition of what would be hate speech. Again, it also gives us challenges when we are monitoring. Again, when you go to these platforms, they will tell you, according to the laws where we are established, there is no known offense by what you are describing. So those are some of the challenges, and I want to believe my co-panelists will help me weigh in on the challenges. I would really want to highlight the things we are really doing. Now, going forward, in terms of collaboration, this team here has helped the regulators develop guidelines for disinformation and hate speech in this Kenya. So which means we are taking care of human rights as we develop the tools that are helping us manage hate speech. So that is a very good collaborative process we have taken up. We are doing joint dissemination exercises so that we are able to leverage on each other's strengths. I wish I'll stop there, John. I hope I'll get another opportunity.
Thank you.